Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. It's been a really quiet week. Obviously, no midweek football at all. Usually around this time of the year, there are some games in midweek, but this midweek, nothing whatsoever. If you looked at the schedule, nothing was happening and nothing at all happened, which I guess is a good thing. We can all go about our day, not go crazy because nothing happened. If something happened, by all means. But nothing happened. At least not to my knowledge, anyway. You might live in a different world. You live in a different head from me, you see. In my head today, it's all, or soothing sea sounds. But listen, I just don't have the time or the inclination for any kind of discordance. If that's what you prefer, by all means, you do you, to each their own, etc., etc. I'm not here to tell anyone what they should and shouldn't do or think. I can only tell you what I do and what I think. And what I think is that this is a podcast about Arsenal, so we are going to talk about Arsenal in this podcast, which is about Arsenal and not about anybody else or what anybody else might do or not do because it didn't happen. See? Simple. So why don't we just get on with today's show? And with me to talk about Arsenal on this Arsenal podcast, which is about Arsenal, I'm delighted to welcome an Arsenal fan who likes to talk about Arsenal. He used to write about Arsenal for Football London. Now he's behind the scenes at The Athletic. It's my pleasure to welcome back Kaya Kaynak. Hello, Kaya.
Hey, Andrew. How are you?
I'm good. I'm living in my own little world, and I like it here. Don't have to look outside. Don't have to think about anything. It's good. How about you?
I'm also, yeah. I heard something happen last night, but I don't think anything happened. I was just saying to you just before we got on, I was out, so I didn't see anything. Some people seem to be talking about something that happened, but. Yeah, bigger things to focus on, I think.
Bigger things to focus, or other things, or anything yes. At all.
Yes,
seems like a reasonable thing to me. I can't remember the last time that we talked. It was probably around the turn of the year, something like that. When you were, doing the old switcheroo in terms of your employment thing, and you're off the Arsenal beat now, having been on it for a long time. How have you experienced the rest of the season, sort of out of that context and sort of back into the context of, do I dare say, like a normal fan? Is that the right way of putting it?
Yeah, it has been. It has been normal. It's been nice. It's been very different. Obviously, the press conferences and the games are a privilege, and getting to ask questions to Mikel Arteta every 3 days was amazing, and traveling with Arsenal around the world was amazing. We've hung out in America, and you've got to do trips to all across Europe this year, which has been fantastic, and it was a great part of the job. But I think I found towards the end it was the travel was kind of wearing me down a little bit, and I was keen to try something new. And it's been nice because I've been able to connect with Arsenal as a fan again, and it's been quite cathartic to get a lot of sort of pent up screams and rage out of my system because there's been a lot of them. But it's also been nice to. I'll be honest. You know what? When the Real Madrid game happened, I remember thinking, I'm so glad I'm here as a fan. I'm so glad I can fully enjoy this. And I was back sitting with my dad, which I hadn't done since COVID. So yeah, it's been really nice. And obviously there's been some disappointments along the way, but it's been nice to sort of get back into my stupid superstitions. So for example, I have to walk to the stadium in the exact same way. I have to buy my program from the exact same vendor. I have to go up the stairs the same way. Otherwise Arsenal lose. And it's a big burden to have on my shoulders, but I have to do it. And, I'll accept your thanks for it later. It's fine. But It's been good, man. It's been different. There's obviously been frustration as an Arsenal fan these past few months. I'm still doing bits as a journalist as well, so still sort of keeping a foot in that pool and still sort of an eye on the inside of the club and still sort of talking to people and around it. So it's nice to sort of experience it on both sides. But it's been frustrating at times, but I think there's been some amazing moments that I'll never forget, and I don't think any of us will ever forget. And yeah, I'm holding on to those.
All right. I mean, but then when you reflect on the season, I recognise as well it's not over. There is a game on Sunday against Southampton, which we'll talk about tomorrow more on our preview podcast over on Patreon. We don't need to go into that now. But when you try and step back. Like, to what extent does your frustration with, where things went a bit wrong this season, and we all know the reasons why, where does that sort of balance out with... Here's where I'm trying to get to with my question. Very poorly worded. They won't let me in press conferences, let me tell you. Where I'm going with this is, I think I would be more worried as an Arsenal fan if I felt like the club and the manager and the people who are tasked with making big decisions this summer didn't recognise what the problems were and how we got to where we were this season. The issues, whether they're disciplinary, whether they're recruitment, whether they're medical or injury related, I understand that the club understands, right? And that kind of gives me just a little bit of hope and expectation that we can address those issues properly in the summer. So I can't tell anyone that they should feel this way, that way, or the other way. And I've been as frustrated as anybody, I think, by some of the things that went down this season that were in our control that we didn't do well enough. But I also think the ingredients are there. The platform is still there. The foundations are still there to improve and go better again.
Yeah, it's frustration that's undercut with a weird sense of calmness, in the sense of, like you said, all the noise that's coming out from the club is positive. I still remember the summer of 2019 when it was, I think, Unai Emery's second season, and all the talk was that Arsenal were going out and signing a winger, and Wilfried Zaha and Nicolas Pepe was obviously the one who came in, but they still had Socrates and Shkodran Mustafi playing at the back. Like, that was still very much the problem. And that was sort of blindingly obvious, and they chose the wrong areas of the pitch to strengthen in. And I think, to be honest, all the noise coming out about a striker, Mikel Arteta, by his standards, going out of his way to really spell out a point in his post Newcastle interview, saying, "I hope the guys upstairs do their job." I can't remember him being that overt with his sort of talking to the board probably since. Do you remember in COVID there was a Liverpool game where Arsenal beat Liverpool, and he came out afterwards and said, "This is great, but we won't do anything unless we strengthen the transfer market." It kind of felt a bit like that a few years ago. So he's clearly putting the pressure on. I guess the unknown quantity is Andrea Berta. We don't really know anything about him in terms of how he works at Arsenal. We've obviously seen his work at Atletico Madrid, where he's done a great, he's got a great CV, but there's differing reports about how much he was involved in that and sort of what his roles were. But that's the unknown quantity. But when you look at the fact that basically it seems that everyone at the club accepts that Arsenal need a striker and a very good one, accepts that they probably need another forward player beyond that and a very good one. And Arteta's talking about firepower. There have been various noises from off the club, briefings in terms of articles that are coming out saying that Arsenal intend to spend. They've got a decent bit of money to spend as well. So when you look at all that, it does seem positive. And I think we can all appreciate that it's difficult to say when Arsenal have a fully fit squad, because they hardly ever do. But when they do have the squads, and we saw this towards the end of last season, the jigsaw pieces are there to win a Premier League. And last season, this exact group was enough to win a Premier League. This season, it's not been because of injuries and suspensions, and maybe we'll get onto all that in a bit. But the calmness I have right now comes from the fact that it does seem that Arsenal are moving very early and moving very quickly to try and get things done. Whereas maybe last summer, they were a bit more, let's say, slower in the market. Obviously, it was the Euros, which slows things down, and the Copa America, which slows things down. This summer, there isn't really that same distraction. There's obviously the Club World Cup, but I think Arsenal will try and get their business done early. And in seasons gone by, when they've got their business done early, it's worked pretty well. So, yeah, maybe if we have this conversation in 2 months' time and Arsenal still haven't signed anyone, I won't be so calm. But right now, I feel calm because, like you say, the noises are positive. They're all saying what we can see with our eyes. We don't feel like we're being gaslit. So, yeah, it's exciting. I think we're all excited by this summer and with a real sense of urgency and drive as well.
Sure. Obviously, the earlier you get your business done, I guess the more settled you're going to be going into pre-season and into a new season. The issue of the striker, obviously, is the one that is paramount, I think, or the one signing this summer that everybody wants to see. Right, we're getting it done. It's definitive. We know who we want. We're not fannying around. We're just going to go get it done. We're going to spend the money and we're going to address that issue straight away. And it remains to be seen who exactly that player is. Would you expect at this point that they know 100% who it is they want? We all understand that there are vagaries in the market, that there is competition as well out there for strikers. I think strikers, generally speaking, certainly strikers who can improve Arsenal and by extension the kind of clubs around Arsenal in terms of the level that you need to compete for a Premier League, etc. The amount of players who can fill the gap in that sense are limited, right? So it is important that Arsenal go out and get that done as quickly as possible, because on the one hand, you can't say, we know what we want to do, we know what the issue is, we know how to address it, and then miss out on main targets because you've been dilly-dallying. I mean, it's not necessarily a trait of the club, but I do think perhaps under Arsene Wenger, let's say, there was a tendency for Arsenal to be in a situation similar to the one that we're in now, where we needed specific things, but waiting around and waiting for market opportunities or not being decisive enough did come at a cost because you ended up not getting the players that you were looking for.
Yeah, this iteration of the Arsenal transfer strategy is a lot more forward planned. If you look at this Martin Zubimendi deal, which looks like it's going to happen, that's been in the works for 2, maybe 3 years. This Benjamin Sesko interest, that goes back years and years. It's not as if Arsenal are going into this market saying, oh, Benjamin Sesko's available. Yeah, okay, we'll stick 50 million on him. It's a lot more than that, and the groundwork has been done for years and years in terms of talking to representatives, getting the money in place, talking with everyone at the club so they know they're aligned, talking with Leipzig or Sporting or Newcastle, if there are still some dreamers who think Alexander Isak could be done, or things like that. And I think people misunderstand when it comes to transfers. You don't put a bid in sort of as you're not hoping. You're not hopeful when you put a bid in the sense there's a lot of groundwork that's gone in. You don't sort of put a bid in without sort of serious indications that the player who you're bidding for will be A, interested in signing, and B, that the club will be interested in selling. It's very rare that you'll see a team do that. And Arsenal in the past have gone for this incremental bids approach. So we remember the Declan Rice deal a few years ago where it was quite obvious West Ham wanted 105, I think, because they wanted him to be the record player after Grealish, and Arsenal went, we'll give you 70, we'll give you 80, we'll give you 90. I hope Arsenal don't do that this summer. And it'll be interesting to see how that approach is different from Berta versus Edu and all the differences there. But in terms of the actual targets that they've identified, Mikel Arteta's had meetings about that since March, probably before. They've kind of identified who they want since then. Groundwork, as I said, has been done. So you would think that everything is in place to get these deals done quite quickly. And it reminds me a couple of years ago, or was it 3 years ago, the Jesus summer and the Zinchenko summer and the Fabio Vieira summer, and all those deals happened pretty quickly. When they sort of happened, it wasn't too long until they were actually sealed. And I am hopeful that it'll be a similar summer this summer to last summer, where Mikel Merino took way too long. Raheem Sterling was a panic buy, Nesta was a panic buy, and Calafiori ended up taking quite a while as well. So fingers crossed they can get all that done nice and early. And I think, like you say, that it will be a case of they've got the targets finalised. And we all know the names. The names are out there. Sesko, Isak's the dream scenario, probably not going to happen because Newcastle will get in the Champions League by the looks of things. Gyökeres, there's talk of Ekitike as well, and there may be a couple of others, but they'll be aligned on who their number one target is. It's interesting that Berta's come in and seemingly put so much weight behind Gyökeres, but I can't see too many spanners coming into the works at this late stage, to be honest. Yeah,
Ollie Watkins, maybe another name that's been doing the rounds, probably a little underwhelming, which I would understand, but I wouldn't 100% rule that one out. Just to slightly correct something you said, Raheem Sterling and Neto were panic loans rather than panic buys, which is probably a good thing considering how things worked out there. But listen, the club has to do things for the benefit of the club, right? And they don't make decisions based on anything other than that. Fan sentiment is not really something that they consider when they make their decisions. Whether it's recruitment or contract renewals or something else. But there is maybe something to be said after a disappointing season where expectations were high and you didn't meet those expectations, certainly domestically in the Premier League, that to demonstrate the seriousness of the message that you sent after the Newcastle game. And it wasn't just Mikel Arteta, by the way. I thought it was very interesting. You know, I agree with you, time for the boys upstairs to do their work. But at the same time, there's a message from Josh Kroenke on the Arsenal website about how they're determined to invest and bring things back. I mean, he spoke today at his press conference about alignment. That's what he talked about when it comes to reaching the next level. But as a statement of intent to sort of get people excited, to get fans, I wouldn't say on board, because I think generally speaking, fans are on board with what we're doing and what we've done over the last number of years. And there's going to be people who have, a slightly more negative view on that and people who have a slightly more positive view on that. But there's no question in my mind anyway that there is, this is a club that is in a very different place than it was 4 or 5 years ago, and a much better place, even if this season has been disappointing. Nevertheless, I think if you want to sort of get everyone together, getting that deal done, whoever it is that they bring in at centre forward, whoever that is, if you get it done nice and early, it sort of calms the waters a little bit, doesn't it, going into the rest of the transfer window, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah. They've not been afraid to make unpopular decisions in the past when it comes to, I think in that same press conference you were talking about there, Mikel Arteta referenced the David Raya, Aaron Ramsdale decision. They're not afraid. They won't sort of be swayed by outside noise in their transfer dealings. But having said that, I do think there is a feeling that in January, I think behind the scenes, Arteta was pretty angry with how sort of lacking in firepower he was left with. And he's referenced it actually a few times in press conferences, which, as we said earlier, is abnormal for him to sort of give us a sort of a peek behind the curtain of what's going on upstairs at Arsenal. And the reason they did that is because they were going to get their main guy in the summer. And that only works if you get your main guy in the summer. If you go in the summer and you don't get anyone, then it's the whole policy of January looks even more ridiculous. So, I think there will be a statement of intent. I think Arsenal have done that in the past, where the first season they finished second. They obviously went out and got Rice, Havertz, Raya, and there was someone else that summer, but Timber. And all those 4 signings have massively improved the squad. And it feels like it's going to be another one of those statement summers, because it felt like back then it needed to be a statement summer. And last season, I think because Arsenal came so close, we were all maybe a little bit more relaxed. I mean, social media wasn't as relaxed, but I think people around the club and talking to you guys and sort of people inside the club were a little bit more relaxed about the squad they had and thinking that could really kick on and win the league. This season, the flaws and the holes in that squad have been exposed brutally. So, a statement of intent is kind of needed. And you would think that Josh Kroenke's shown it in the past. I wonder if Andrea Berta will also, in his first window in the club, want to say, "This is what I do. These are the signings I can pull off. Look at me," kind of thing. And
I was going to ask you about Andrea Berta, because I did wonder if, in perhaps the same way that when Arsene Wenger arrived, there was a French tint to our transfer dealings because he knew that market so well, that there might be a sort of a Spanish tint to our transfer dealings this summer. And we'll come to maybe some of the names who've been mentioned with over the last couple of days. But he's obviously operated across Europe and has knowledge of all the big leagues and everything else. But I think when you come from one particular country, you're probably a bit more specialized in your knowledge in that sense. So I did wonder if maybe we might see some moves from the Spanish market, from La Liga, a bit more focus on those players, because I think the connections that he would have, let's say as the sporting director in Spain, he would be very well acquainted with sporting directors across Spain, whereas his interactions with some of his colleagues or compatriots, at other European clubs would only come about when A, there was a deal to be done, or B, if Atletico are meeting whoever in European football. So that was just something that occurred to me today. I did wonder.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because he's coming in March, how much of it, and we spoke about the signings being predetermined and years of groundwork going in, and you look at Zubimendi and Sesko and those kind of players who the groundwork's been done a long time in advance. And obviously Berta's come in and is making himself known with these Gyökeres links and it's interesting that those came out almost straight after he was appointed, and you wonder sort of what kind of impact he wants to have on this squad, because obviously Arteta has a very big say, and he's a big personality, and he's got a lot of sway within the Arsenal setup, and rightly so, because he's earned it with his performance over the years, and he's got a big sort of voice in the Kroenke's ear. So I think Berta will be coming in this sort of Machiavellian power struggle, which maybe makes it out to be a bit more cutthroat than it is, but he'll be wanting to sort of put his name on the table and say, this is what I can do. And yeah, the Gyökeres thing, if he wins out on that, that will be fascinating, because it seems like maybe that's more his guy and Arteta prefers some other guys, and that'll be interesting to see where the club go on that. And yeah, the Spanish links are interesting. Obviously, the Zubimendi one is difficult, because that's been, like I said, years in the making. But maybe someone like a Nico Williams, who again is a long-standing interest, but you wonder if that could help smooth relations over. Andrea Berta seems to be a much more quiet operator than Edu. Edu was a charismatic guy, a sort of flamboyant character, and he was very much sort of trying to be the public-facing side, whereas Berta seems a bit more behind the scenes and a bit more sort of hush-hush in the way he does his business. And to be honest, I think as long as the right signings come in, I doubt Arsenal fans will mind too much which approach it is. But it is interesting to think of a Nico Williams-type deal, or other players in La Liga who are being linked, this Juan Garcia as well. All those signings have been in the offing for a while. But yeah, like you say, you wonder if Berta coming in with his Spanish connections, with his contacts, can help sort of push those deals over the line and grease palms that need to be greased, because that is an important part of it. Relationships are an important part of it, and he'll have those. And as well with the Italian side of things, obviously he's worked in Italy, is Italian, and will have contacts there. So it helps to have a sporting director with contacts across Europe, and it'll be interesting to see how that materialises over the summer.
We've talked about striker, obviously, and that is the main one. But to what extent do you think a wide forward is a necessity for Arsenal this summer? It's something I would really like to see, something a little bit different in the wide areas, maybe, with all due respect, an upgrade, or somebody who can do something a little bit different on the left-hand side in particular. If we do have Bukayo Saka, who is, one of the best players in the world on the right-hand side, and look, with Saka in particular, I'm hoping he has a really nice summer holiday where he can relax and rest and get himself back up to speed, because I think since coming back from injury, he hasn't quite been the Bukayo Saka that we all know. And that's understandable. It's not criticism. It's understandable. I think he needs, perhaps as much as anybody, a little bit of time off in that regard. But the wide areas are interesting, aren't they? Because if you bring in somebody on the left, it almost certainly means one of Leandro Trossard and Gabriel Martinelli will leave the club. James wrote a piece today in The Athletic talking about both of those players. I'm not going to say I'm an expert in reading between the lines, but my sense was, based on some of the reporting, that Arsenal, because Trossard has a contract until 2027, they feel like they should give him a pay rise without giving him an extension, which, I'm not sure I'm really understanding that, I have to say. I think Trossard is a really, really smart player, but somebody who blows a little bit hot and cold. And I know he's versatile. He can play as the false nine. He's done that, to some effect as well. Martinelli, they have a contract till 2027 with another year. So there's no urgency. There are no talks at this moment in time. Again, I'm reading between the lines. And I'm thinking, okay, they're happy to give Martinelli another year to see, can he take a step forward? And if he doesn't take a step forward, perhaps then next summer you're looking at moving him on in another way. Before I maybe ask you about the potential arrival then, how do you view those two players? And, let's say if one of those were to go this summer, would you have a preference over which guy it was?
Yeah, my Arsenal hot take for a little while has been the number 9 is less important than the left winger. Because I think with Kai Havertz in the middle, when he's fit, you've got a player who will probably get you about 20 goals a season if he manages to stay fit the whole season. He was on course for that this season, which from a centre-forward is, I think, enough. If you've got wingers either side of him who are getting 30, 40 goals, a bit like Liverpool had with Roberto Firmino, would never get the big numbers of a Salah or a Mane, but that was fine because you had Salah or Mane getting those numbers. And Arsenal have that on one side with Saka, who will chip in with probably, you would assume if he's fully fit for a whole season, 20 goals, lots of assists as well from set pieces, takes penalties, very effective there, lots of end product from him. On the left-hand side, like you said, there's not been enough. And Martinelli's numbers for 2 seasons now have been frustrating. I feel for him a bit in the sense that almost it seems every game he's being asked to hold the width on that left-hand side, and he's not able to beat 1 or 2 men every single game, which, fair enough. Some of the best wingers in the world, unless you're Lionel Messi, you would struggle with that. And it's interesting these past few games when he's been moved a bit more centrally against Newcastle and Liverpool. He's actually looked way better, and you can see he's running into space, and it makes him look so much better. And Trossard is a player who, like you said, has his strengths as well as a versatile player, a bit more of a dribbler than a speedster, someone who likes to come short, someone who can play in multiple positions, which is really helpful. But I think, if I had to choose between those two, it's interesting. So the bit in James's piece that really stood out to me was, particularly on Martinelli, the small sample of clubs that he would want to go to from Arsenal, or the small sample of clubs that could afford to sign him. And that is something that would have to factor in. Trossard seems to have that interest from Saudi Arabia. He'd be a bit cheaper. His wages wouldn't be as expensive as a Martinelli. And he's obviously someone who can operate in more positions. If you ask me just without any of those factors in mind, who I prefer to keep, personally, I prefer Trossard because I think he can play in multiple positions. I think he can offer Arsenal a little bit more. I think Martinelli, listen, we all remember the kid who arrived from Brazil aged 18 and surprised us all. I've still got fond memories of that Nottingham Forest brace, the goal at Chelsea in his first season. We all thought he was going to be this world-class player, and he's maybe not quite reached those heights, but he's got to a very, very good stage. But that season where he got 15 goals, you wonder if that was maybe proving to be an outlier as opposed to sort of what we were expecting from him generally. And it's interesting, maybe he suffered a little bit from the instability on the left-hand side. We've spoken about how Saka hasn't quite looked himself. I think that's linked to the fact that Timber and White have both not been fully fit. I think Ødegaard's not been fully fit and not played to his best. If we apply that logic on the left-hand side, Martinelli's had a lot of changing left-backs. Declan Rice has sometimes played in that position. There's been other players too. Mikel Merino's played there, and he's had to deal with a lot of different combinations, whereas that season where he got 15 goals and I think 15 assists as well, he had Xhaka, Zinchenko, and there was no changing, and I think that really benefited him. But if you ask me which I prefer, probably I'd think Martinelli could raise more money. I think that would be the one I'd keep Trossard out of the two. But the reality is, it does seem that there is more interest for Trossard, and like you mentioned, he's on the older end of the spectrum, and Arsenal needs to think about moving him on. So it's interesting to see what would happen. My preference is keep Trossard, but it doesn't seem from the noises coming out like that's going to be the one.
Yeah, it is. The obvious one I think to let go is Trossard, because if the offer comes from Saudi Arabia, if he's going to be 31 in December, do you get something back from the investment that you've made in him? And I think, over the course of his Arsenal career, he has been a good signing based on what we paid for him, based on what we've got for him. I worry a little bit like you that I think Martinelli has reached some kind of, I don't want to say ceiling necessarily, but plateau. And when I look at that left-hand side, I look at the numbers, right? And this season, from 50 appearances, Martinelli has 10 goals and 6 assists in all competitions. Trossard, from 55 appearances, has got 10 goals and 9 assists. They're not terrible numbers, but neither player is making the absolute case that, right, you've got to keep me over the other one. And I think when you look at those numbers, it makes it clear that some kind of an upgrade over one of them is a necessity, because then you look at Bukayo Saka, who from 36 appearances and with a big spell out injured has 12 goals and 14 assists.
Yeah.
In part because he takes some corners and we're quite good from corners, but more than that, it is because he's a player with real end product. Consistent end product, a lot of goals and a lot of assists, and has done it season after season after season. So when you see someone like Rodrigo linked with Arsenal, which I think, by the way, is really unlikely based on how much Real Madrid would want for him, but you see players like Nico Williams, who's got a release clause, who would want big wages though, and that release clause is, because of the way it works in Spain, you are required to pay that up front in one go to the Spanish league, and then you activate the release clause of the player. So that's when transfers normally work in installments. What's that one? Is it Klarna? Is that what people used to buy things now?
Yes.
Yeah, football clubs invented Klarna. Anyway, it does make it a little bit more complicated. But when I'm looking at this squad, I see the need for a striker. I absolutely do. But I also see that if we want to improve to the point where we score another 16, 17, 18, 20 goals in the Premier League next season, they can't all come from a centre forward, because, Kai Havertz did get goals for us at centre forward. There's going to be a bit of sharing of game time. I don't think we're going to bring in somebody who's going to play every minute of every game, because we do have other options there. And when I'm looking at how we improve and looking maybe at how we change things a little bit in terms of how we attack, that left-hand side is the one where I think I'm quite aligned with your hot take on Arsenal about a left winger being maybe not more important than a striker, but I think really, really important for this team.
Yeah, it's also... So those numbers that you mentioned there from Martinelli and Trossard, they're, with the greatest respect, they're squad player numbers. They're not first-team player numbers. Mm-hmm. And the Rodrigo links are interesting because his numbers aren't majorly better, but he's playing in a team where he's obviously a supporting cast member to Mbappe and Vinicius Junior, who are two of the best players in the world. But the thing I found interesting about Arsenal's left-wing sort of pursuit going into this summer is... you look at a Nico Williams, who you mentioned there, or even a Jamie Gittins, who's been linked. I've seen Brian Mbeumo's name actually doing the rounds as well. They're quite similar players in the sense they're the speedsters, the Martinelli style run in behind. And it's interesting to note that sort of they're very similar profile to Martinelli. None of them are anything like Trossard. So you do wonder, it makes you question sort of what the thought process is there. But yeah, I agree that the left-hand side has not been doing good enough for Arsenal in terms of goal contributions. And you look at this season, Liverpool have won the league. Obviously, Salah's had an amazing season. But Cody Gakpo's chipped in with, I think, 15 goals, a decent amount. I think, obviously, Luis Diaz has chipped in with his fair share of goals. And they get goals from across the front line. It's not just Salah. Obviously, Salah stands out because his numbers are exponential. But if you look at the years gone by, Erling Haaland has obviously scored loads of goals for Man City. But behind him, you've got Phil Foden in that season scoring 20-odd goals. There are players from across the pitch scoring goals. You can't just have a centre-forward who scores, optimistically, let's say 40, 50 goals, because you need players from other positions to add. And there are going to be games where the centre-forward isn't on it and you need other players to get you out of jail. And Liverpool have had that this season when, if Salah's maybe not been up to his best level, Luis Diaz has pulled them out, Cody Gakpo has pulled them out of trouble. And Arsenal haven't had that this season, because it's basically been, if the set pieces aren't working, if Saka hasn't been able to pull something out of the hat, then from the left-hand side, there hasn't been enough to sort of get those guys out of jail. And yeah, they need it massively. The left-hand side does need to offer more. It's true. And it does seem, to be honest, that's what Mikel Arteta is saying, codified in his press conferences. And I think they agree internally with our hot takes. So maybe not actually that hot at all. Maybe sort of tepid takes. Yeah,
quite tepid. Once it gets done, I think we'll all be pretty happy. We were asked this question at Union Chapel on Saturday evening, and it was about sort of what your ideal summer looked like from a transfer perspective. There tended to be a great deal of consensus, because I think everybody recognises what's required. So striker, winger, central midfielder, who we're going to get in terms of Martin Zubimendi's coming in. There's going to be a goalkeeper, whether it's Joan Garcia. Is that the best way to spend £30 million or 30 million euros this summer? I guess. As long as you get the other stuff done, people won't have a complaint about it. But is there anything else? I mean, I'm sort of I'm looking at the defence as well, and we'll come to departures now in a second. I'm thinking, when I look at Jurrien Timber having surgery, that he's been playing with an ankle injury for many, many weeks, Mikel Arteta said, that now requires surgery. Ben White having had a knee injury this season and come back and taken time to get back to speed. And I'm not sure he has got back to 100% yet. And he was back in February, by the way. So, we have to acknowledge that injuries, operations, when clubs talk about, right, he's going to be 2 months out, 3 months out, sometimes there's this expectation that, okay, he's back and now he's 100% fit, he's 100% match fit, he's ready to go. but we can see from Ben White in particular, who I think everybody knows is a really committed guy, has played through the pain time and time again for Arsenal, probably to his detriment, it has to be said. But, there's no lack of desire on his part to be out there and playing at his best. But it does take time that you are, subject to the whims of the human condition, even if you are a professional footballer. And I look at William Saliba now, who's got a hamstring strain that he picked up on on Sunday against Newcastle. Nobody has played more outfield minutes than William Saliba because, well, we haven't really had anybody to play there if we've needed him. So I'm sort of looking at a right-sided defender. In an ideal world, Takahiro Tomiyasu is fit and nobody has to worry about anything, but he's in a place where, I think he's really working hard to not to save his Arsenal career, but I think when a player has been as injured as he is, I think you have to recognize that there's a real difficulty there for him, and I feel really sorry for him and I wish him all the very best. But can you rely on his return? I'm not sure you can. So I'm looking at a right-sided defender as part of my transfer window this summer. I'm curious as to whether that's something you would like to see as well, or if there's anything else about this team you would like to see, whether that's a transfer or maybe a redeployment with some of the players that we already have available to us.
Yeah, it's interesting. The right-sided centre-back, I agree, does need to potentially be done. You can get by with Ben White shifting in, with Yuri and Timber shifting in. With even, you move Thomas Partey to right back and you can work it out. Declan Rice can drop back there. There are players in the squad who can make it work. Kivior can move across. Calafiori can move across. They have the numbers there, but I think we've seen this season that numbers isn't necessarily enough. Like, look at Raheem Sterling. He was a number, but, he essentially wasn't. You need to have a seriously viable quality option if you want to challenge for a Premier League and Champions League and Carabao Cup and FA Cup, which is what Arsenal want to do next season. It'll be interesting with the centre-back stuff, though, what happens with Jakub Kivior if he ends up staying. I think that may be linked to the Gabriel injury and how severe that is and how quickly Gabriel comes back because, like you say, it takes a while to come back from these injuries, and Gabriel had major surgery on a hamstring injury, and that takes a long time, and we can't just assume that Gabriel will start next season on top form because he'd have been out for... When did he pick up his injury? It was the start of March, was it?
Yeah,
so by the time it comes around, it will be 5 months, essentially. He hasn't really played competitive football. So the assumption that he's going to be straight up to speed, that'll be difficult. So, yeah, I think Arsenal are, for all the defenders they have at the club, somewhat short at the back because Tierney's going to leave. You assume Zinchenko's going to leave too. If Kivior leaves, it does look like they're a little bit short. Tomiyasu doesn't look like he's back for the foreseeable. Like you said, it's actually a really sad story with that. And we all wish him all the best. So, yeah, you start to think who's out there. Someone who sort of I was interested in because he can play centre-back and right-back, and I think Aston Villa are a bit of a financial mess. Ezri Konsa I really like. I think he could be a smart move. Those kind of players, because Mikel Arteta will want a versatile player. He won't just want a right centre-back. But it's a difficult sell to say, come and be back up to Gabriel and Saliba, the two best centre-backs, I think, in the world. That's a tough one to convince someone to come. Maybe you get a young player who can come in and learn, but how many minutes are they actually going to get? Because like you said, Saliba's had the most minutes of any player in the Arsenal squad outfield this season. Yeah, it's a tricky sell. I wouldn't say it's high on the list of priorities, though. I would say that goalkeeper obviously has to be done. And you mentioned Juan Garcia. I think 30 million would be too much. It'll be interesting. So you talked about the release clauses. Sometimes clubs will offer slightly over a release clause if it means that they can pay in instalments, and that is an option that Arsenal could have for a deal like that. But even still, I would think that 25, 30 would be a lot for a backup goalie, and I'm sure there are alternatives out there who are a bit cheaper who can sort of fill the gap. Karl Heinz coming back from Valladolid, I don't think he's quite that level, but they would need someone in that position potentially. Goalkeeper has to be done, centre forward has to be done, number 6 is going to be done, left winger has to be done. I think we all agree on that. So I would put centre back sort of 5th in the sort of tier list of priorities. I'd like for it to be done, but if it's not done, I won't be sort of losing any sleep over it. I think another interesting point that maybe people aren't talking about as much is obviously Sterling's going to leave. It looks like Reece Nelson's going to leave. If one of Martinelli or Trossard were to leave, then backup for Bukayo Saka on the right wing would be quite sparse. Obviously, Ethan Nwaneri's done it this season and can do it quite well. But I do wonder if maybe a second winger would be required as well. Again, that would be low down on the priority list. But I just think in terms of Bukayo Saka's injury this season came because there wasn't a viable option really to rotate and rest him. If Arsenal can get that through the door, superb. But again, it's sort of icing on the cake territory as opposed to the actual important stuff that we've already touched on.
Where do you see Nwaneri next season, and what is his role, or what should his role be? Because I think one of the issues that people have spoken about a lot this season is Martin Odegaard and his form. And look, I think it's fair to say he didn't play to his best level this season. We've certainly seen him play more consistently well. I think he does end up with, let me have a look at the stats here, 5 goals and 12 assists in 44 appearances. So, can do better, but still not absolutely terrible. But I think there have been periods of the season where if you had another option in that position, maybe you can rotate. Is that where Ethan Nwaneri should be? Is that the role that he should be playing in this team, having gained some experience on the right-hand side, now move more central, work with him during the summer, let him be that backup? He is maybe the closest analogue to Martin Odegaard that we have in the squad. I think they're different players. How they play is very different. Odegaard is a bit more creative. Nwaneri is a guy who can burst between the lines and all of those things. And he has a trademark goal to his name already. But I'm thinking, do you have to pick a job for him? Can he be the backup to Bukayo Saka because he's shown that he can do it and he's shown that he can score goals from there? Or is the need to address midfield creativity a bit more pressing, particularly if you're of a mind, which I am, and I'm not sure if you are, you can tell me if you agree or not. I don't necessarily see Arsenal going out this summer and buying a creative midfield player. I think Zubimendi will bring something different to the midfield. I think it allows you to construct your midfield a little bit differently. But the idea that Arsenal will go out, for example, and buy Ebereze, I don't see that happening. I don't see that and haven't heard that. And I could be wrong. That could be part of their plans they're keeping under wraps and not talking about it because they want to, keep their powder dry, whatever it is. But does Nwaneri become the solution to that issue if a purchase is not going to be made?
Yeah, I also can't see it happening because, like we've mentioned, there's so many other things that need to get done. The amount that a player of the quality of creative midfielder that Arsenal would want would cost. So you mentioned Eze, at least now he scored an FA Cup winner, 60, 70 million. Similar players in that bracket would cost around that much. And I think we're looking at a similar price for a striker, similar price for a winger. Zubimendi's going to be in the £50 million mark. If you spend 30 million on a goalkeeper, you're already nearing 200 million before you've even thought about a defender or another creative midfielder. So, yeah, I don't see that happening this summer. That's not to say I don't think it would happen. Also, Fabio Vieira is still an Arsenal player, and I think Mikel Arteta would be potentially, tempted to use him in the future if he doesn't leave. But I would be highly surprised if he doesn't leave this summer in one form or another. Yeah, Ethan is an interesting one because you mentioned his trademark goal, that sort of step inside from the right-hand side of the box and curl it in from the edge. And it was amazing when he did it against Man City. He did it against Preston, and there was other instances which aren't springing to mind right now that he's done it this season.
Champions League game in Girona, I think.
That's it, Girona, that was it. I knew there was a Champions League game in there. And it felt to me like at the end of his run in the Arsenal team, teams had kind of figured that out. And teams were putting 2 in and sort of not letting him cut in and shoot in that way. And it was similar with the cross that he put in for Mika Marina against Leicester. And teams had sort of figured out if you give Ethan that space on that right hand side just in front of the box, he's going to punish you. And it seemed like they were stopping him from doing that. And it's a key asset of Ethan's game. And I think he has to diversify his game. And the way you do that, in my opinion, is by being on the pitch, trying things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. And Bukayo Saka has added more strings to his bow throughout his career as an Arsenal player because he's had time on the pitch to sort of experiment, see what works, see what he can do, and come up with sort of clever ways to beat opposition defenders. My fear with Ethan is that he won't get enough time on the pitch. And again, going back to Fabio Vieira, he came into Arsenal with a difficult role because he was this right 8/right winger which just happens to be the two positions where Arsenal have their two best players probably in the squad, Ødegaard and Saka. Now, if Ødegaard and Saka are fit for 38 league games, you would assume they'd start at least 30 of them. That's being generous, probably more. So how many league games or league starts is Ethan going to get next season? It would be limited. I don't feel that you have to limit him to one position. I don't think you have to say he's the Saka backup or anything like that, because look at Miles Lewis-Skelly. They didn't limit his position, and look how he's gone on to become a fantastic asset for Arsenal this season. So I think he can perform in various different roles. I just wonder what that being on the bench and not playing. I've spoken to young players at Arsenal who have told about sort of the difficulty of being on the bench, kind of knowing you're not really going to feature, kind of knowing you're going to be there just for the experience, and how difficult it is to psych yourself up for that. And these past few weeks, it's felt like Ethan's had that to deal with because he's not been coming off the bench, he's not been getting minutes, and it must be tough because his career has been such an upward trajectory until this point, mostly, that he's sort of experienced this it seems harsh to even call it a down, because he's finishing his first season as a 17, 18-year-old with, I think, 5 odd goals and lots of assists as well, and more minutes than anyone probably would have expected at the start of the season. But it'd be interesting to see how he rides this trajectory in his career. I can't see him going out on loan because, like you mentioned, the numbers in the squad are slim-ish in those creative midfield positions. But I do wonder if maybe a loan where he plays every week wouldn't be the worst thing for him. But he'll be in and around it. He'll be learning from Arteta, and hopefully he can get his opportunities. It does remind me a bit of when Phil Foden broke in at Man City. And he took ages to sort of actually become the regular that, until this season he was, where he's been a real sort of PFA Player of the Year winner and all those kind of things. It took him a while to rise to that level in the Man City squad, and lots of people were saying you need to loan Phil Foden, you need to give him some game time, and Pep was adamant that no, he's going to stay with me. I understand why you're nervous, but he's going to stay. He's going to play with us eventually. He'll get his time. I wonder if it's a similar case for Ethan, because he strikes me as a very similar player to Phil Foden. He's got that, the way he shoots, the way he strikes the ball from the edge of the box. He's sort of, I'd say he's more end product focused than sort of assist focus. Feels a bit more Foden-like as well. So I think he'll be with Arsenal next season. I hope he gets lots of minutes because we all love him. We all want him to see him scoring goals and doing that. But it's interesting to compare his and Miles Lewis-Skelly's different rises. Obviously, Lewis-Skelly's gone on and probably is going to be an England starter. Ethan's not quite there yet, but he's got the potential, and interesting season.
It is funny because I think at the start of the season, everyone was very much focused on Ethan more than Miles, and Miles is the one who's sort of copper fastened his breakthrough in that way. The club, I think we understand, are in talks with both those young guys over new improved contracts, which I think they've earned. Without delving into the realms of conspiracy, do you maybe draw any connection between Nwaneri's lack of minutes and the contract extension, or is it just the context of the season, the period of the season? I mean, he really hasn't played a lot in the last number of weeks, and I think there have been opportunities for him to get onto the pitch, and he just hasn't been given them. Definitely.
I was frustrated that he didn't play more against PSG, for example, when Arsenal were chasing a goal. I thought, that's, because when he came on for 5 minutes in the first leg, it felt like he made a difference. And that's frustrating. I wouldn't draw those comparisons personally. I think Arteta's good at separating them. You think of Eddie Nketiah a few years ago when he played an important role for Arsenal when they were going to qualify for the Champions League, and he was out of contract at the end of the summer, and he was playing every week. And, I think if Arteta views you as someone who can help him on the pitch, doesn't really care about anything else. I think that's his tunnel vision focus. So I would say that, no, I wouldn't draw that correlation there. But I hope Arsenal get Ethan's contract done soon because, fingers crossed. Final question then, just while we're talking about creative midfield players. And I saw it was reported that Max Dowman has been told that he will be part of the first team squad next season, that he will be going on pre-season tour. Pre-season tour makes a lot of sense to me. How much anyone can realistically expect from a 15-year-old in the Premier League, I'm not 100% sure. Yeah. But is there something to, let's say, a reluctance to buy a creative midfield player playing the medium to long-term game with Max Dowman? Is that too risky a thing to do when a guy is like obviously showing all the talent in the world, but doing it at a level which is not really comparable with the Premier League? I think, who did I see?
I think it was Arteta, he was talking about how going from academy football to first team football is a bit like driving go-karts and then being stuck behind the wheel of a Formula One car. Maybe not quite, but there is an element of truth to that. How do you view his situation and maybe the responsibility of the club to protect a young player who is still only 15? I mean, we had a situation with Ethan where he couldn't even change in the dressing room because of health and safety rules or whatever it is, that, Max Dowman is going to have to get changed on the bus if he's with the team next season, wherever, or in a cupboard beside them. On the one hand, you want to harness the talent, you want to create a pathway, but on the other, you have to respect that I don't want this to sound in any way pejorative or old-fashioned, but it is kind of a man's world. And at 15, you're not quite there yet,
I'm just picturing on the Emirates Stadium tour, this is the cupboard where we allow Max Dowman to get changed. From a genuinely legal point of view, there are sort of things that Arsenal will have to do to protect Max Dowman because, from a media point of view, ethically, there are real... So I remember that Max Dowman's been someone people have been aware of since he was 13. He was scoring goals, I think, for the under-18s at 13, and he's been a really important player for that sort of age group, and he's been way above his age group for a long time. And ethically, there were lots of conversations about, can we report this? Should we report this? Because he's such a young person, and you have to really protect those kind of things. And it took a while. Eventually, I think he's reached such an exponential level, and now Arteta's talking about him in press conferences that it's okay. But yeah, there's a lot Arsenal needs to do. It's interesting. I look at him. I mean, I've not seen him play in the flesh, but I look at his figure, and he seems like maybe he could do with bulking up a little bit. And you talk about the step up from the boy to a man's game. That is a big part of it, because in training, people don't go as hard on you as they would in a real match, and that's something you would expect that Arteta and the physical staff will be looking at. But they've done this before. Remember with Ethan last summer and him really impressing in America, and Fabio Vieira was still with the squad. Arsenal made a pathway for Ethan to play more minutes by saying, see you later, Fabio. Emile Smith-Rowe's gone. Ethan, this is your spot in the squad. You're going to play. I think there probably is an element of long game where they see they've got this talent coming through. Maybe because it's not such an urgent priority, that creative midfielder position. They have a look at Max Dowman this year. They see how he does, see how he reacts in and around the first team changing room and dressing room, and how he deals with the hype of probably playing minutes for the first team as a 15-year-old and how he copes with that. I think that'll be massive for him. But the summer, like you say, pre-season is a really good time for him, and I think it's a really good way of doing it in terms of just sort of getting the chance to expose him to what a crazy and sort of fun and amazing club Arsenal is. When they go out to Southeast Asia, it will be like nothing he's ever experienced before. The media focus on him, the fans, the intensity, all of it will be like nothing he's ever experienced before. It's interesting. He's obviously... Art de Roche has written a really good piece, again, on The Athletic about him, and he's with England under 17s in the Euros in Albania right now, and apparently was one of the best players on the pitch, if not the best player on the pitch, as England drew with Belgium, I want to say 1-1. And within that game, there were examples of him off the ball needing to learn a few things. So they spoke about where he needs to stand at set pieces and things like that. And those are the kind of things that maybe at under 17 level, they'll be a bit nice with you about it. But Mikel Arteta is, if you're in the wrong place in a first team Premier League game and you're standing in the wrong place for a corner, Mikel Arteta is going to let you know. I'm sure we can all imagine what it'd be like to be on the hairdryer treatment from him. So they'll manage it slowly. They'll try and deal with it slowly. But I think after a while, and we saw this with Miles and Ethan at the start of the year, if they're that good, their age becomes irrelevant. Miles was 17 at the start of the season. Ethan was 16, 15 when he broke in. When they're that good, when they're that talented, their age does become irrelevant. And Arteta's shown that he's not afraid of playing those young players if he feels they're up to the standard. And with all the hype around Max, fingers crossed that he is.
All right, well, we'll keep a close eye on the summer. See him charging through the midfield, providing assists to that lovely shiny new striker that we've got, and that lovely new left winger that we've got and that we all want. All right, we better leave it there. Kaya, as ever, a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much indeed to Kaya. Good chats as always. And there is, of course, going to be plenty going on this summer. There are 2 transfer windows. I stood corrected earlier today by people on our Discord because I thought the early transfer window was only open for teams who are playing in that disgusting, reprehensible wankfest known as the Club World Cup, set up by that horrible, creepy man who spends most of his time hanging around with the worst people in the world, it seems. Anyway, turns out I'm wrong. Anyone who wants to do some business during that transfer window can do so. It runs from the 1st of June until the 10th of June. Then it closes, and then they open it again on the 16th of June, all the way through until September the 1st. Why are they closing? Why don't they just leave it open? There's probably an explanation of some kind, but to be honest with you, I couldn't give a fuck, really. I don't care. Anyway, we'll see if Arsenal do their business in window 1 or window 2. Can we do that early signing to get everybody excited and enthused for the summer ahead, or will we bide our time and just wait and see what happens? Your guess is as good as mine. We will look ahead to our final Premier League game of the season against Southampton on Sunday in our preview podcast over on Patreon, patreon.com/Arseblog, if you want to get involved with that. It's also worth pointing out that there is a very, very, very big game this weekend. Arsenal in a Champions League final taking on Barcelona in Lisbon. In your podcast feed already, there is a preview. Tim has done a preview podcast for the game. Tim is out in Lisbon. He'll be providing full coverage over the weekend on our dedicated Arsenal women's section over on Arseblog News. So there'll be stories and videos and social media stuff. So we'll be there all over it and hoping, of course, that Arsenal can do the business. Be under no illusions as to how difficult it is. Barcelona are an incredible team. It's going to be very, very tough. But what an achievement it would be if Arsenal could win that Champions League final. Fingers crossed. Keep everything crossed for Arsenal women on Saturday. For now, though, folks, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being with us. And we will catch you on the next one. Until then, cheers. Bye-bye.